Africa, the cradle of humanity, the place where the story of mankind began, and where the promise of that story still waits to be fulfilled. It holds 1/3 of the world's resources, yet carries most of its poverty. It feeds the global economy, yet cannot feed all its own children. The question is no longer, why is Africa poor? The question is, who keeps it that way? For 60 years, the continent has been ruled not by vision, but by survival. Power here is not a service, it's an inheritance. Elections are held, but choices are managed. Democracy speaks loudly every 5 years and then goes silent until the next campaign. Meanwhile, the world calls Africa developing, as if the hands that built pyramids, kingdoms, and empires suddenly forgot how to build. But Africa doesn't lack skill. It lacks leadership that serves the people instead of itself. The tragedy is not that Africa is exploited. It's that it's exploited with its own permission, signed in contracts, sealed in silence, and renewed every time citizens give up on change. This isn't a story of a continent without hope. It's a story of a continent running out of patience, a place where the young are more educated than ever, but ruled by men who learned nothing new in 40 years. Africa is not waiting for saviors. It's waiting for truth. And that truth begins with one uncomfortable fact. The greatest threat to Africa's future is not the West, not the past, but the way it is led today. To understand Africa's present, we have to confront its past, not to stay there, but to expose what was left behind. Because poverty did not grow naturally from African soil. It was planted, watered, and carefully maintained. When the colonizers came, they didn't just take land. They took control of the African mind. They broke tribes into borders, turned unity into division, and built governments designed to serve power, not people. Colonialism didn't end with independence. It simply changed its uniform. When the flags were raised and the anthems played, the world celebrated freedom. But what kind of freedom leaves a country with no factories, no schools, and no control over its own economy? They handed Africa a key, but kept the lock. The new African leaders inherited nations that were never designed to function independently. The roads led from mines to ports, not from villages to markets. The economies depended on exporting raw materials and importing everything else. That wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint for dependency. And in that dependency, new rulers found their opportunity. Men who once fought for liberation began to copy their former masters, living in palaces while preaching equality, filling prisons while promising freedom. The colonizer left, but the colonial mindset stayed. The problem was never just corruption, it was imitation. Power in Africa became less about building nations and more about building empires of ego. Presidents became owners. Criticism became treason. Elections became rituals to remind the people who was in charge. By the 1970s and 80s, a new game began. The West and the East, America and the Soviet Union, looked at Africa not as a partner, but as a chessboard. They funded rebels, armed dictators, and called it strategic balance. Mobutu in Zaire, Mengistu in Ethiopia, Savimbi in Angola, all men backed by someone, somewhere, for reasons that had nothing to do with the people they ruled. And when those wars ended, the economic wars began. Loans, debts, development programs, words that sounded noble, but often came with chains invisible to the eye. African leaders signed deals they didn't understand, and their people paid for them in decades of austerity and hunger. The IMF said, cut spending. The World Bank said, open your markets. And Africa did, not realizing that open doors also invite thieves. Foreign companies returned, no longer as conquerors, but as investors. They came not with guns, but with contracts. And those contracts achieved what colonial armies once did with force. By the 1990s, democracy became the new slogan. Every dictator learned a new word, election. They discovered that they didn't need to abolish democracy. They only needed to control it. Stuff the ballot box, silence the media, buy the opposition, and call it victory. The world applauded. Aid continued. And through it all, a myth was born that Africa was somehow not ready for real democracy, that poverty was part of the process, that corruption was a cultural problem. No, corruption is not African. It's imported, financed, and protected. No people are born to be poor. They are made poor by systems that benefit from their misery. Africa's tragedy is not that it was colonized, but that it learned to live with colonization long after the colonizers left. The borders remained, the currencies remained, the political habits remained, and so did the dependence. Today, many African leaders still act as if their job is to impress outsiders, not empower citizens. They travel to summits for photo shoots, not solutions. They beg for loans while their people drown in the wealth beneath their feet. And every generation is told the same lie. We are moving forward. But forward to where? To another speech? Another flag raising? Another promise? If the path always leads back to poverty, maybe it's not a road, maybe it's a circle. Africa's poverty is not a mystery. It is the direct product of how power was built, protected, and worshipped. And until that power is broken, not replaced, but redefined, the story will remain the same. Because the problem of Africa was never its people. It was, and still is, its leadership. In Africa, power is not seen as service. It is seen as survival. It's not a duty, it's a throne. And once a man climbs to that throne, he no longer sees the people below him, only threats. Decade after decade, the continent has watched the same movie with different actors. The costumes change, the flags change, the speeches change, but the script remains the same. We are here to serve you, they say, while serving only themselves. In many countries, elections are no longer a celebration of choice. They are an expensive ceremony of manipulation. The ballot box has become a stage prop, the vote a formality, and the people and audience forced to clap. Let's not pretend. We all know what happens. Votes vanish, results are delayed, opposition leaders disappear, and when citizens protest, they are called enemies of peace. Look at Zimbabwe, 2008. Morgan Tsvangirai won the first round. The people celebrated, believing the winds of change had come. But then, the violence began. Hundreds killed, thousands tortured, and in the end, he was forced to withdraw for the sake of peace. Peace, the word dictators love most because it justifies everything. This is the reality. In many African states, elections are not about who wins. They're about who counts. And those who count never lose. Foreign observers come, take pictures, issue reports. The elections were peaceful, they say. But peace without justice is just silence, and silence is the enemy's greatest weapon. The tragedy runs deeper than stolen votes. It's cultural. Power has become personal, not institutional. A man is not loyal to a constitution. He is loyal to a leader. A minister does not serve the people. He serves the hand that feeds him. When the leader changes, loyalty changes. That's why our institutions remain weak, because they are built around men, not laws. In Africa, losing power is seen as death, not transition. That's why leaders cling to it until the very end, changing constitutions, extending terms, and inventing new excuses every time the clock runs out. We need stability. We're not ready. We must finish the revolution. But revolutions never finish when power tastes sweet. And the people? They grow tired. They stop believing. They stop voting. And that's exactly what those in power want. A quiet population that expects nothing. But there's another side to the story. It's not just the leaders, it's also those who protect them. The international partners who preach democracy on Monday and sell weapons on Tuesday. They condemn coups, unless the coup serves their interests. They call for transparency, unless their companies benefit from the darkness. Every stolen election is signed not only in the capital, but also in foreign boardrooms. Every dictator has a sponsor. Every silence has a price. So, when the West lectures Africa about good governance, it's hard not to ask, who kept these men in power for decades? Who shook their hands while their people starved? Who looked away every time an election was stolen? Africa's leadership crisis isn't isolated. It's part of a global hypocrisy. And until both sides stop pretending, democracy will remain what it has become today. A flag waved during speeches, then folded and hidden in the dark. Because true democracy isn't about ballots or slogans. It's about accountability. And in too many places, that word is forbidden. In Africa, corruption doesn't hide. It wears a suit, drives a convoy, and gives speeches about integrity. It cuts ribbons on schools that were never finished, and holds conferences about transparency under tinted glass. Corruption in Africa is not a side effect. It's the system itself. And like every system, it survives because everyone is made to depend on it. From the man who steals millions in government contracts to the civil servant who asks for something small to stamp a paper. Each one believes he's just surviving in a world that doesn't forgive honesty. But this disease didn't start by accident. It grew in a soil where truth costs more than lies, and where silence became the safest language to speak. Take Mozambique, once seen as a model of post-war recovery, but behind the headlines of growth and stability, billions were disappearing. In 2016, the world discovered the hidden debts scandal, $2 billion secretly borrowed with fake companies, fake projects, and very real consequences. Hospitals ran out of medicine, schools ran out of funds, and ordinary Mozambicans paid for a crime they never committed. That was not just corruption, it was betrayal, written in foreign contracts and signed by local hands. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the story turns tragic. A land richer in minerals than almost any other, yet its people are among the poorest on Earth. Cobalt, gold, diamonds, resources that could power the continent, but instead fuel foreign profits and local warlords. The mines feed the world's technology, but the miners can't afford a phone. This is the cruel irony of Africa. It is not poor. It is robbed repeatedly, systematically, by leaders who learn to turn poverty into business. And corruption has a twin: fear. Fear keeps the poor silent. Fear turns journalists into targets. Fear makes good people pretend not to see. In Mozambique, investigative journalist Carlos Cardoso was killed in 2000 for exposing financial crimes linked to elites. In Ghana, Ahmed Hussein Swala, part of an anti-corruption team, was shot in 2019 after revealing football scandals. Across the continent, those who speak truth risk disappearing in the night. But the greatest tragedy is not the fear itself, it's the silence it produces. When citizens stop believing their voices matter, when they say, "This is how things are," then corruption wins, not just in government, but in the hearts of the people. It starts small. You pay a bribe to get a document faster, you accept a lie because nothing will change, and soon dishonesty becomes normal. You see, corruption is not only in leaders, it's contagious. It trickles down until it becomes part of daily life. And every time someone says, "At least he helps his village," or "they all steal but he's better," we normalize the rot that keeps us poor. We turn thieves into heroes because we've lost faith in justice. The result? A continent rich in everything, except accountability. Foreign companies profit, politicians thrive, and the ordinary African continues to struggle. Not because Africa lacks potential, but because too many leaders profit from its misery. Until the price of silence becomes heavier than the fear of speaking, nothing will change. Because silence is the oxygen of corruption, and every time we stay quiet, we help it breathe. Africa doesn't need more presidents. It needs public servants. Men and women who understand that power is borrowed, not owned. Who know that leadership is not about how long you rule, but how much you build before you leave. The next revolution won't come from guns. It will come from consciousness, from citizens who refuse to worship politicians like gods. From young Africans who no longer trade their votes for t-shirts, rice, or promises. From soldiers who protect the Constitution, not the president. From teachers who teach truth, not fear. This is not about optimism. It's about responsibility. Because if we don't fight, nothing will change. And if you're still here, listening, then you are part of it. So share this message. Let it spread across borders, across languages, across generations. Subscribe, because this is not the end. It's just the beginning of a conversation Africa has avoided for too long. And remember, if we stay silent, the next 50 years will look exactly like the last 50. But if we speak, if we act, the next 50 could finally belong to us.